for the union labor.
877-970-2999. It's Morano on AM 970. The Answer.
Our union sowing, our wages going to feed the kids and run the house. We work hard.
Good morning, everyone. This is Frank Morano on AM 970 The Answer. Thank you for starting your Sunday morning with me. I don't know if the folks that they're talking about in that song were members of public sector unions, but certainly someone that would be cheering on the AFSCME side in tomorrow's Supreme Court arguments. Now, on Sunday morning, I feel often that we need a break from the really heavy news of the week of school shootings and battles over tax reform and who the president may or may not be paying off in terms of hiding his adulterous affairs. So I try to keep it kind of light on Sundays. Talk about movies, talk about, professional wrestling, Star Trek, anything and everything. However, tomorrow, there is a case that is being heard by the Supreme Court which has, and this is not an exaggeration, it has the potential to completely change the way organized labor operates going forward. It has the ability and the potential to completely change what's happening in New York City with respect to the teachers union, the police union, every single public sector unions. And I know we have many of you listening to this program who are firefighters, teachers, police officers, and a lot of times you're not pleased with a lot of the things that your union does. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to have a real discussion about the Janus decision or the Janus case that the Supreme Court is hearing tomorrow. And you're going to get to hear from two experts on both sides of this issue. And maybe you'll think about it in a different perspective, and maybe it'll help you make up your own mind in terms of where we are. Now, my understanding of what the Janus case is essentially right now in 20 some odd states, including New York, if you're a member of a public sector union like the UFT, like the PBA, like the DEA, the union is able to basically mandate your union dues. It doesn't matter if you're not crazy about what the union is doing in terms of political activism or other public policy matters. If you want that job, you've got to pay union dues. So this fellow Janus in Illinois said, you know what? I don't like some of the things that my union is doing. I don't think I should have to pay the union dues. Now, to help us understand the arguments on both sides of the issue, we have Barry Saltzman. He's a partner with the law firm Pitta LLP, which represents a number of clients that would be affected by this. Barry, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
And we also have Dr. Edward Stringham, who's a professor of economic organizations and innovations at Trinity College. He's the president of the American Institute for Economic Research and editor of the Journal for Private Enterprise. Dr. Stringham, thank you for coming in.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Now, don't judge me for not wearing a tie and being in short sleeves and dungarees today. I mean, I am looking at two accomplished guys who wear a tie for a radio interview, and I must say I'm quite intimidated. So go easy on me and use small words as you describe what's going on here. Barry, let me begin with you. First of all, thank you for coming in.
Thank you very welcome. Pleased to be here.
Now, let me begin with you. Is my understanding of what the Janus decision, I've heard it discussed or pronounced both ways, is my discussion of the Janus case accurate? Is it basically having to do with mandatory union dues for public sector workers?
I'd say overall, yes, but now you've posed a question to a lawyer, so I cannot answer this question as broadly as that. So I want to make two distinctions, because sometimes the way you frame a question and the issue gives you the answer. First of all, does it have the implications for all unions the way all unions do their work? No. The issue is for unions that represent workers in the government sector, because that's the only place the First Amendment comes into play. So technically speaking, the unions that I represent, like the detectives union in the city of New York, for example, like PEF, which represents workers in the state of New York, they're affected by this. Workers in other industries, like the Hotel Trades Council here in New York.
That's private sector. That wouldn't be affected
sector,
at all.
Not affected by the decision itself. But anybody knows what happened when Ronald Reagan fired all those controllers. The private sector said, you can do this, let's do it too.
Right. And so it had sort of a ripple effect beyond organized labor, in all of organized labor.
So my apology, Frank.
No, it's okay.
Going this full circle,
Yeah.
you're right.
As long as you're not charging by the hour, we don't mind a lengthy, substantive answer. Now,
The other point is, no, these are not mandatory in the sense that many people understand it. Unions are elected. You do not get the right to represent workers in any sector, public or private, unless the workers in an election have decided they want that representation.
But so I understand it, and Dr. Stringham, depending on the arguments that the Supreme Court hears tomorrow, if they rule in favor of the plaintiff, Janice, then if I'm a teacher or a cop or a firefighter in New York City, the practical implication of this is if I don't want to, I'll no longer have to pay union dues. Is that accurate?
That's right. So the bottom line is, should people be forced to pay the equivalent of union dues for a union that practices things that they oppose? Should you have to pay for a union that is actively working against your interests? Should you have to pay for a union which is advocating political candidates and political policies which you oppose? And Janice says, no, I don't want to be forced to pay for these policies and this political activism which I'm against. I think people should be able to opt out of that.
And just so everybody understands where the perspective everybody's coming from, what exactly is the American Institute for Economic Research, the group that you're the president of?
We're an 85-year-old economics institute funded by donations and other sources to educate Americans about the importance of economic choice, economic freedom. And I would say that the question of forcing people to be a member of a union against their will is a very, very clear violation of people's economic agency. So
ideologically, you would tend, I think, at least in economic issues, to skew a little bit to the libertarian or conservative perspective?
We don't label ourselves, but I'm okay with
You're
calling me a libertarian for sure. I support Adam Smith and freedom of association, so yes.
Got it. Barry Saltzman, attorney with partner, with PITA LLP. If Janice wins, if the plaintiff wins, if I'm a cop or a firefighter listening to this radio broadcast, the practical implication is I'll no longer be mandated to pay union dues. Is that accurate?
That's correct. That is correct, and that leads to the problem.
Okay, so now what's wrong with what Ed just laid out for us? Why should, if a union is taking a position that I don't agree with, and I'm a cop or a firefighter or a teacher, why should I be forced to pay those dues?
Because, as I said before, it's the way you frame the question. The question that's being framed has already been answered. There's no problem. Those issues which people politically disagree with their union, they do not have to pay for. That is settled law for the last 40 years since a case called Abood, which dealt with this issue and decided those issues that are political, who the union supports for candidacy, what laws the union supports, those are political questions, and the state cannot compel you to pay money to support a political view you don't agree with. Nobody disagrees with that position. But the things that the state, that Abood said unions can mandate dues equivalents, or what we call in our area fair share fees, are the things that any worker would have the right to talk about. I want an increase in pay. I want health care. I'd like some tuition assistance so my kids can have a better education. I'd like the safety net so when I get older, I don't have to live in poverty off of Social Security, but can have a reliable income stream from a retirement fund that has been negotiated for me by my union. Most employees would say, I'd like that. Now, there may be some people who say, no, I don't want any of those things. And those things are all clearly under existing law, something that the union can represent the workers, and it doesn't create a First Amendment problem any more than a firefighter or a detective saying, I'd like a raise. The difference is that the firefighter and detective who says it with one voice can be ignored, and was.
but
not collectively.
For instance, Michael Mulgrew, the head of the UFT, the UFT in the aftermath of the Eric Garner incident, they participated in a rally that Al Sharpton had conducted. And I can tell you on Staten Island, a lot of my teacher friends, they were outraged that their union leadership was doing this. Why shouldn't they, for a free market, from a free market principle, have the ability to say, I am furious at what my union leadership is doing. I don't want to pay these union dues anymore. What's wrong with giving them the choice?
The choice on the political question that you've just framed, they have. They do have it. But they have it in a systematic way because our free market is not the market of tooth and claw where people go at each other without any restrictions. There's regulation. Almost any civilized society is going to have regulation. Those political issues that you've just articulated, they do not have to support the union on that, and they have the option under existing law to opt out. That is the equivalent dues, the fair share. So they have the option to opt out on political issues if they don't like what the union's doing, or they don't even want the union to talk about those. But on the issues that affect all the workers in the workplace that need to be addressed in a collective voice for workers to have any voice at all, any meaning or any impact on the employer, those issues are covered by the fair share.
Ed, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm going
What's
to
the problem?
kindly
Go
disagree. The union does a lot of things. It bundles things together. And I would say the vast majority of what you see them doing is political advocacy. But when they say, oh, no, this is just a small amount. I'm probably the only person in this room that was forced to pay union dues for a public union, which I opposed. And they basically set the union fees at, say, whatever, I'll make up a number, $500, and they say, but if you don't want to pay the union, the political part, you only have to pay $499. So basically, they're making you pay the full amount or very close to the full amount, whether you like it or not. And then they say, oh, this $1 we're not going to spend on politics, but the $499 they are spending on politics.
But let's say I am a teacher or a cop or a firefighter or any number of public sector unions around the country. If I look, the government, this U.S. government does all sorts of things that I as a taxpayer don't like and don't agree with, but I don't have the ability to stop paying taxes. Why should I, as a teacher or a cop or a firefighter, have the ability to say, you guys that just negotiated my contract, my generous vacation package, the generous sick days, you know what, I'm no longer going to pay for the negotiators that do that. Why should I be able to get something for free?
It's a very small percentage of what they do. When I was a member of the Cal State system at San Jose State University, they were actively, my union was actively negotiating against my interests. So in San Jose, the prices were higher, and the union was saying, well, we have to have equal pay across all campuses. So the ones in the middle of nowhere had to have the same wages as us. Economics professors also get higher wages than sociology professors because they understand economics, and they were also actively advocating equal pay in all disciplines. So I would say, please stop negotiating on my behalf. The majority of the union might be happy with sociologists having the same pay as everybody else, but that's not benefiting me. So why should I be forced to do that?
I have to take a break, and I hope you guys can stick around for a few more minutes if you don't mind. But let me ask you, Barry, and if people are just tuning in, we're talking about the decision or the case that the Supreme Court is going to be hearing tomorrow. Probably won't have a decision until about May. That has to do with whether or not public sector unions should be able to collect mandatory union dues from their members. Helping us have that discussion is Edward Stringham, who you just heard, and Barry Saltzman, who's a partner with the law firm LLP, Pitta LLP. Barry, let me ask you, though, to Ed's point, we have a First Amendment, as you alluded to. We have freedom of speech, freedom of association. The Supreme Court has ruled that money is speech. We might disagree with that, but isn't it a violation of the First Amendment to force me to associate with causes that I don't agree with? So the teachers union has been a stalwart supporter of not just political candidates, but they've been an opponent of school vouchers. In many instances, they've been an opponent of charter schools. If I disagree with those policy positions, why should any of my paycheck be mandated to go to it?
Because the issues that you're addressing, those political issues, again, this is not the Janus case. Janus is simply about whether you can compel, whether the state can enter into contracts with unions which say that people who get the benefits of the collective bargaining agreement, the representation, the just cause, so they can't be fired for any reason like an at-will employee, those people have to pay their fair share for those issues, not the political issues. You can always opt out.
But for on a practical level, my union dues go in part to pay the staff of the union president, right? And that president spends a good part of his day and a good part of his time using the bully pulpit of that union presidency to advocate for XYZ public policy issue, doesn't he?
He does. And that is a different issue than the one before Janus, because Janus is just a theoretical issue. And that's the interesting thing about Janus, because the practical arguments are coming in on the amicus briefs, the friend of the court briefs, from the city of New York, the city of Los Angeles, the state of New York, saying practically we can't deliver the services vital to our communities unless we have unions that can voice the concerns of the workers that they represent. And the only way it's worked for 40 years is with the fair share fees. In a way, it worked before the system was a disaster. It was garbage in the streets. It was teachers refusing to teach. It was firefighters and detectives and police officers who couldn't deliver the services. And that's what the 60s and 70s looked like in New York City. That's in the brief of the city of New York to the Supreme Court. To avoid now, to get to the point that the if you're going to have an effective voice, you need to pay for it. The question that you've raised as to what about the shares or that Ed, I can't speak to Ed's personal experience, but the unions I represent that have the privilege.
Right. You represent the Suffolk County PBA, the Detectives Association here in New York City.
Right. The transit workers. You know, these government, the PEF, the government employees that we represent through their unions, everybody fills out these arcane, sophisticated forms that rival even the president's tax returns. And the union spends time identifying with CPAs what share is political and what share isn't. And if somebody doesn't like that, they can challenge that in court. They can challenge it in arbitration. That's a different case. Those cases are winding their way through the courts, and fine, that can be debated. But that's not Janus. Janus says you can't pay. You don't have to pay for the benefits which you're going to receive in your collective bargaining agreement if you say you don't want it.
Let me take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend a few more minutes with Barry Saltzman and Edward Stringham as we discuss the case the Supreme Court is going to be hearing tomorrow. I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to make their closing argument, as if this case was being decided by a radio jury rather than the Supreme Court, and we'll then ask you to weigh in with how you'd come down on the merits of this case, both from a legal perspective and from a policy perspective. This is AM 970, The Answer. I'm Frank Morano.
Morano returns in just a moment to give you another reason not to go to sleep yet. On AM 970, The Answer. It's Morano on AM 970, The Answer.
Yeah, he's the coat of swing. It's just about ready to do that thing. I don't want no tears, I don't want no lies. Above all, I don't want no alibis. This judge is hip, and that ain't all. He'll give you time if you're big or small. Fall in line.
Good morning, everyone. This is Frank Morano on AM 970, The Answer. How much better would the Supreme Court be if Pigmeat Markham was on the Supreme Court? Well, that is a question we will never know the answer to because they don't allow cameras in the Supreme Court. You're not going to get to hear the arguments that the lawyers on both sides of the Janus case are going to be making before these 9 unelected judges who are appointed for life and have the ability to completely reshape policy in our country. Tomorrow, they're going to be taking on a question that has about 4 decades worth of precedent. And the question is part of the Janus case, which we've been talking about with Barry Saltzman, who is a partner with Pitta LLP, and with Edward Stringham, who's with the American Institute for Economic Research, is should public sector unions be able to continue to mandate that their members pay dues, and the people who want the job have to be members of that union. I'm going to begin with you, Ed. A lot of folks listening are police officers, firefighters, and teachers. The teachers really enjoy having summers off. The cops really enjoy being able to have a lawyer fight for them if they're ever accused of any sort of misconduct. The firefighters enjoy being able to retire after 20 or 25 years, depending on when they entered. They want to have a powerful union so that then when they sit down with negotiators, they're in a good position for their members. What you're proposing and what the Janus case would potentially do is really crippling, isn't it?
It would make contributions voluntary. The theory that the union differentiates its political activities with the rest of its activities is just a myth. If you go to the website of Janus's union, you can see them doing all types of advocacy. They were in a I'm with her campaign with Hillary, and the idea that all of these police union members are benefiting from that, well, I'll let them decide. And that's what this is all about. Do you have the right to voluntarily contribute to your union, or are you going to be forced against your will to be supporting a union which you actively oppose, forcing you to fund all types of things? Janus's union is advocating the metric system. I mean, what kind of un-American union is advocating the metric system?
We could use the metric system. I could never remember how many ounces in a gallon. I'm all for the metric system. Barry, I'm not going to ask you to comment on the metric system. I do want to ask, though, so this is only going to affect about how many people will this actually affect directly? Do we know ballpark?
I would say everybody who's represented by a public sector union.
What do we think that's 3.5 million, 5 million?
Yeah, it's
in that
vast,
range.
in the millions.
Yeah, that's what I read, around 5 million people.
And so, I mean, there are about 30 states in the country that are so-called right-to-work states where this is not in effect, right? So,
correct.
And
28.
those states have unions, so unions are able to succeed without these mandatory union dues. What's wrong with having New York and New Jersey and other states follow that model of other right-to-work states?
That would be said by the state of New York and the city of New York in their amicus briefs. We have our system of government and responsibility, because this is ultimately about responsibility. Our system has precedent, which you correctly point out would be overturned, and there's great arguments why we don't want precedent overturned.
Right, stare decisis.
Right. That's how we work. That's how we plan expectations in a society. But there's also the principle that you've got to pay for what you get, your benefit.
Right, you're getting the benefits of a union negotiator to go to the table and fight for all sorts of benefits. Why shouldn't you have to pay for that?
That's right.
Yeah.
And what the city points out, and which the advocates of the Abood case, which is the precedent, in point out, is that if I say to somebody, you can get these benefits because you say you don't like them, but you can get them anyway because unions have to represent everybody. They're required by law to fairly represent everybody. If you get those benefits, you don't have to pay for it. You'll get them for free. There's going to be some people are going to say, that's great, I'll do that. And then their neighbors are going to say, well, why shouldn't I do that? And then the people who say, well, I ought to pay for what I'm getting and I have responsibility are going to say, but I'm looking like a fool.
Yeah.
So you get into a spiral. Now, there are states where, as you point out, there is a right to work.
And there are unions.
And there are unions there. The unions that have gone from from agency fees, fair share fees, to right to work in these recent situations have seen tremendous drops in their membership because you can get something for free, and there's pressure to do that.
Well, what about that, Ed? Look, a lot of conservatives are always talking about personal responsibility and freeloaders and things like that. Why should a public sector worker enjoy the benefits of being in a union without having to pay their fair share to contribute to what the union activity is?
The biggest freeloaders in society are the people running the unions, charging exorbitant fees to their members, helping special interest groups. They've got a tremendous amount of power, amount of money that's coming from the workers. The fact is...
But if I don't like what the union's doing, I can run for union president myself, or I could vote for somebody that's going to say we're going to go in a different
you could become
direction.
the mayor of New York, and good luck with that. The idea that we need these bureaucrats representing us has been rejected by the rest of society. Private sector company people don't want to be in a union. Union membership is now at approaching 5% of society. People are much happier not having these bureaucrats setting their wages for them, protecting people who are maybe not contributing their fair share, but collecting dues from the working members of that union.
Now, Barry, I want to give you the last word. I asked Ed to kind of make the case to a teacher or a firefighter that is really rooting for the precedent to remain as it was. I want to give you the opportunity to talk to people that are a little closer to Ed's, I believe, political persuasion or ideological persuasion, and talk to conservatives. Donald Trump had a tremendous amount of union support, not just in where I'm from in Staten Island, but in places like Ohio and Virginia and the Carolinas and Florida. He really did have a lot of support from rank and file members. I take the express bus with a lot of construction workers who had Donald Trump stickers on their helmet along with a union sticker. Now, I realize those are private sector unions, not public sector workers, but what would you say to conservatives, to Trump voters, to registered Republicans that don't like what these public sectors are doing, the public sector unions are doing? Why should the precedent remain as it has?
If you fashion yourself as conservative, and if you are represented by a public sector union, and I would ask you to consider staying true to your principles. The basic principle, as I understand it, of conservative ideology is responsibility. You should pay for what you get. You should not freeload. And we've discussed that, so I won't go into any further. Another basic principle, I think, is democracy. And that isn't the purview of only the conservative. That's the legacy of our society, the United States, for the last 200 years. If you don't like what your union membership is doing, go campaign. Go exert your democratic power to change what you don't like. That's a basic principle. And please, go ahead and do it if that's what you feel.
That is Barry.
And the last point is the one made by our city and by our state. It's home rule. I don't know what is important to people in other states and cities. I know what Los Angeles says because they filed the brief in support of New York.
New York should make its own laws.
New York should make it, and has. And the government, our principles are one of federalism. This would be a national decision that would destroy the city of New York and the state of New York's decision on behalf of its citizens that in order to deliver the basic public services and provide a living wage, fair share ought to continue to be the law.
Way late here. I'll give you the 20 seconds to respond, Ed, if you want to have a final closing thought.
Yeah, the politicians and the unions are in bed with each other, and they're advocating a certain agenda. And the idea that we have to be forced, that's going to eliminate the ability to extort from the average worker to advance their pockets. So I think this is great. If this ends, workers will be much better off as a result.
All right. That is Edward Stringham. He's with the American Institute for Economic Research. You can learn more about them at PITTER.org. We've also been talking with Barry Saltzman. He's a partner with the law firm of Pitta LLP. If you want to looking for representation, you can go to Pitta, PITTA law.com. And what I'd love to do is hear from you. See if you've been persuaded, and if you were one of those 9 men and women in black robes tomorrow, how you would vote after hearing the arguments on both a legal basis and on a policy basis. Give me a call at 877-970-2999. That's 877-970-2999. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you'll both come back in the future.
All
Thank
right,
you, Frank.
thank you.
This is Frank Morano on AM 970. The Answer. We will continue right after this with your telephone